Picture Yale University, 1951. William F. Buckley, Jr., a recent graduate, publishes God and Man at Yale, documenting a strange transformation. The university, founded by Congregationalist ministers to train clergy, now actively rejected its Christian origins. But Buckley missed the deeper pattern. Yale still used the same words: truth, justice, service. The language remained identical, but these values now served opposite functions. What once developed individual consciousness had become institutional programs that prevented that very development. What Buckley witnessed at Yale was happening everywhere. Sacred values weren't disappearing, they were being translated into secular forms that looked similar but functioned as their spiritual opposites. The question nobody asked: what happens to human consciousness when spiritual values become institutional programs? Today we'll examine this translation process through documented evidence, tracing how authentic spiritual principles transformed into their opposites while maintaining identical language. Every major institution in the West underwent the same transformation between 1850 and 1950. Churches morphed into social services, spiritual communities became political movements, sacred rituals evolved into secular ceremonies. The language remained: brotherhood, justice, equality, freedom, truth, but something essential shifted. Rudolf Steiner observed this pattern in 1919, calling it the mechanization of spiritual life. He watched spiritual impulses that once required individual consciousness development become external systems requiring only participation and compliance. But Steiner documented something more precise than general mechanization. He identified a systematic inversion affecting all domains. Values originating in spiritual recognition were converting into materialist programs that prevented the consciousness development those values originally catalyzed. The distinction matters: converted, not destroyed. The spiritual impulse remained, but now served opposite functions. Let's trace this translation through documented sources, starting with Brotherhood, the spiritual recognition that all humans share divine nature. Original source: Jesus in Matthew 23, 8-12. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have only one master, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth Father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. The greatest among you will be your servant. In early Christian communities, this meant developing actual consciousness. You had to cultivate the capacity to perceive the Christ nature in others. Paul describes this in Galatians: there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. This required spiritual perception through inner development. Declaration wasn't enough. You had to develop the consciousness to experience unity beyond surface differences. First translation: the French Revolution marked a critical shift. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. Brotherhood became a political principle enforced by law. The guillotine ensured everyone was equally shortened by a head. External enforcement replaced internal development. Today's translation: modern corporate diversity statements represent this translation's endpoint. The company IBM states, all qualified applicants will receive consideration for employment without regard to race, color, religion, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, national origin, genetics, disability, age, or veteran status. The translation analysis: Jesus taught brotherhood through developing spiritual perception, the consciousness to see the divine nature present in every human being. This transcended all external differences because you perceive something deeper than race, class, or nationality. The brotherhood was metaphysically real, experienced through developed spiritual sight. Corporate programs: brotherhood through demographic management, creating systems that acknowledge differences and manage them fairly. This emphasizes the very categories: race, gender, religion. That spiritual brotherhood was meant to transcend. Instead of seeing beyond differences, you become more aware of them while ensuring equitable treatment. The inversion: original spiritual brotherhood dissolved the significance of external categories through direct spiritual perception. Modern institutional brotherhood makes external categories the primary focus while managing them through policies. What once meant develop the consciousness to see past all divisions now means become highly aware of all divisions and manage them systematically. The same word: brotherhood. But one eliminates the consciousness of separation while the other institutionalizes the management of separation. Freedom underwent parallel but more complex translation, revealing the systematic nature of this process. Original source: Rudolf Steiner's The Philosophy of Freedom, 1894. The human being is not determined by the past, but can determine himself through moral intuition, arising from spiritual activity. Real freedom comes through developing your consciousness until you can think from your spiritual core rather than react from social programming or biological impulses. It requires inner work, spiritual development, consciousness evolution. Now compare this to how modern institutions define freedom. The American Civil Liberties Union says, the ACLU works to defend and preserve the individual rights and liberties guaranteed to every person in this country by the Constitution and laws of the United States. Notice what happened to freedom. Steiner taught freedom as developing the inner capacity to think independently of all external authorities, government, society, even popular opinion. You become free by strengthening your own consciousness. The ACLU offers freedom as legal protection from certain authorities while keeping you dependent on other authorities, the Constitution, the courts, the legal system itself. One version makes you internally free, the other version keeps you externally protected but internally dependent. You get freedom by having lawyers defend your constitutional rights, not by developing the actual capacity to think your own thoughts. Same word, completely opposite approaches. Justice is even more revealing. From the prophet Isaiah 58:6-7, Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless, poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him? This is justice through personal spiritual responsibility. When you encounter someone in need, you help them directly. Not because it's your job or legal obligation, but because you've developed the spiritual capacity to recognize their divine nature. Justice happens through your own hands, your own resources, your own spiritual development. Compare that to how we handle justice today through institutions like the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The mission of HHS is to enhance the health and well-being of all Americans by providing for effective health and human services, and by fostering sound, sustained advances in the sciences underlying medicine, public health, and social services. See the complete reversal? Isaiah's justice requires you to develop spiritual wisdom and compassion so you can serve others directly. Modern institutional justice removes your personal responsibility entirely. Professionals handle it for you through government programs. The original develops your capacity to recognize need and respond from spiritual insight. The institutional version eliminates your need to develop any spiritual capacities at all. You get to feel good about supporting justice through taxes and votes without ever developing the wisdom, compassion, or spiritual recognition that justice was supposed to cultivate in you. Ancient wisdom traditions understood something modern institutions systematically exclude: the Hermetic principle from the Emerald Tablet. That which is above is like to that which is below, and that which is below is like to that which is above, meaning that spiritual realities and material realities mirror each other. True wisdom recognizes that inner consciousness development reflects an outer manifestation, and that spiritual dimensions are as real and important as physical ones. True wisdom recognizes correspondence between spiritual and material realms. Inner consciousness development reflects an outer manifestation. Spiritual realities are as valid and important as material ones. Now listen to the National Science Foundation's mission. NSF supports all fields of fundamental science and engineering, keeping the United States at the leading edge of discovery from astronomy to geology to zoology. Notice what's missing: any acknowledgement that consciousness, spiritual realities, or inner development might be relevant to understanding truth. Ancient wisdom, truth through understanding spiritual material correspondence. Modern institutions, truth only through material measurement, excluding spiritual dimensions. The original reveals spiritual foundations of material existence. The institutional version denies spiritual reality exists while claiming to seek truth. You can feel enlightened about truth and knowledge while remaining completely unconscious of spiritual realities. Here's why this is the perfect spiritual crime. It satisfies your soul's longing for authentic values while preventing the spiritual development that would actually fulfill that longing. Carl Jung documented this translation's psychological effects. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, he observed that secular institutions trying to replace spiritual functions create neurosis. The psyche recognizes something essential is missing but can't identify what. Jung called this statistical morality, being good by social standards while remaining unconscious of authentic nature. External rules replace internal wisdom. Institutional values substitute for individual development. You feel like you're living your deepest values. You support justice, equality, freedom, truth, brotherhood. You vote for the right candidates, donate to the right causes, participate in the right programs. Your soul feels partially satisfied. But you're not developing the spiritual capacities that would enable you to actually live these values through your own consciousness. The secularized systems provide external solutions that eliminate the development requirement. You can feel righteous about justice without developing wisdom. You can feel loving about brotherhood without developing spiritual perception. You can feel enlightened about truth without developing consciousness. It's the perfect spiritual bypass. You get to feel spiritually superior without doing spiritual work. Meanwhile, your actual consciousness remains undeveloped. You're still reactive, still judgmental, still unconscious of spiritual realities, still incapable of genuine spiritual perception. But you feel so good about supporting the right values that you never question whether you're actually living them. This spiritual hijacking isn't new. It's an ancient pattern that's been perfected over centuries. Constantine took the living spiritual community of early Christians, people developing consciousness through direct spiritual practice, and turned it into state religion that used Christian language while serving imperial control. The medieval church took Jesus' teachings about individual spiritual development and turned them into institutional authority and theological doctrine that prevented direct spiritual experience. Modern secularism completed the theft. They took every remaining spiritual value and turned it into institutional programs that use spiritual language while serving materialistic control. Same pattern, same spiritual forces, increasingly sophisticated methods. Each time, they use humanity's authentic spiritual longing to create systems that prevent the consciousness development those spiritual impulses were meant to catalyze. Here's how you can always tell the difference between authentic spiritual values and secularized inversions. Authentic spiritual values always require your consciousness development first. You have to develop wisdom to live justice. You have to develop spiritual perception to experience brotherhood. You have to develop inner freedom to act from true choice rather than conditioning. Secularized systems provide external solutions that eliminate your development requirement. Institutions handle your values for you. You can feel good about supporting the right causes without developing the consciousness to actually live those values. Original spiritual teaching. Become wise so you can act justly. Secularized institution. Support our justice programs so you don't have to become wise. The original requires inner work. The inversion eliminates inner work while maintaining the feeling of spiritual advancement. Once you see this pattern, you can never unsee it, and the moment you see it clearly, you become immune to the manipulation. Let's look at how this plays out in contemporary values-based movements. Take any modern cause you support: environmental protection, social justice, human rights, education reform, healthcare access, whatever matters to you. Now ask yourself, are you serving this cause through your own spiritual development and direct action, or are you supporting institutions that claim to handle this cause for you? Are you developing the consciousness capacity to live sustainably, or are you supporting environmental organizations while maintaining consumptive lifestyles? Are you developing wisdom and compassion to serve justice directly, or are you supporting justice organizations while remaining judgmental and unconscious in daily life? Are you developing spiritual capacities to teach and inspire others, or are you supporting educational institutions while avoiding your own consciousness development? The pattern is everywhere once you see it. We've been conditioned to outsource our spiritual development to institutions that claim to live our values for us. This creates what I call the consciousness prevention system. You get to feel spiritually advanced without developing spiritual capacities. Your ego feels righteous and morally superior. You're supporting the right causes, believing the right things, participating in the right programs. You feel enlightened compared to people who don't share your values. Meanwhile, your consciousness remains at exactly the same level it was before you started supporting these causes. You haven't developed wisdom, compassion, spiritual discernment, moral intuition, or the ability to see spiritual realities directly. But the system is designed to make you feel like you have. You confuse supporting institutions with developing consciousness. You mistake political agreement with spiritual advancement. You think having the right opinions equals having spiritual insight. This is how they keep spiritually gifted people unconscious while feeling spiritually superior, the perfect trap. Here's what's changing. More and more people are feeling that spiritual uneasiness. Your souls are recognizing that something fundamental is wrong with institutions that claim to represent your values. You're starting to feel the difference between supporting causes and actually living values, between having right opinions and developing consciousness, between institutional participation and spiritual development. This recognition is spreading faster than the manipulation systems can contain it. People are waking up to the fact that they've been spiritually outsourcing their deepest values to institutions that prevent the development those values were meant to create. The more sophisticated the manipulation becomes, the more obvious it becomes to awakening consciousness. So what's the alternative? How do you reclaim sacred values from their institutional hijackers? Stop letting institutions live your values for you. Start developing the consciousness capacities that would enable you to live those values through your own spiritual being. Want justice? Develop wisdom and compassion through spiritual practice until you can serve justice directly through your own actions. Want brotherhood? Develop spiritual perception until you can see the divine in others and relate from that recognition. Want freedom? Develop your consciousness until you can think your own thoughts and act from moral intuition rather than social conditioning. Want truth? Develop spiritual discernment until you can perceive spiritual realities directly rather than accepting institutional authorities. This requires actual spiritual work, not just supporting the right causes, but developing the consciousness to live the values those causes claim to represent. Here's how to start reclaiming authentic spiritual values this week. Choose one sacred value you hold dear: justice, freedom, truth, brotherhood, whatever calls to your soul most strongly. First, stop supporting institutions that claim to handle this value for you. Notice how much of your spiritual life consists of outsourcing your values to external organizations. Second, begin developing the consciousness capacity to live this value directly. If it's justice, start developing wisdom through spiritual study and contemplation. If it's brotherhood, start developing spiritual perception through meditation and service. If it's freedom, start developing inner freedom through consciousness exercises. Third, practice living this value through your own being in small daily ways. Serve justice through wise action. Express brotherhood through spiritual recognition. Exercise freedom through conscious choice. Fourth, connect with others who are doing the same authentic spiritual work, not just supporting the same political causes. This is how sacred values return from institutional captivity to living spiritual practice. The theft of sacred values represents the most sophisticated spiritual manipulation in human history. They've taken everything your soul recognizes as holy and turned it into weapons against your spiritual development. But this creates an opportunity. The more obvious the manipulation becomes, the more people are being forced to choose between authentic spiritual development and institutional spiritual bypassing. You can continue supporting institutions that claim to live your values for you, feeling righteous while remaining unconscious. Or you can begin the real work of developing the consciousness capacities that would enable you to live sacred values through your own spiritual being. The sacred values are still there, waiting to be reclaimed. They're just waiting for you to stop outsourcing them to institutions and start developing the consciousness to live them directly. The sacred values haven't been destroyed, they've just been kidnapped, and it's time to bring them home.